Thanks very much indeed, Peter, and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to reflect briefly on where we've come from in pharmacovigilance in Europe. As Noel has said, today's fifth stakeholder forum is all about looking forward to the imminent implementation of the legislation. And I know everyone here is as eager as I am to get to the tricky issues, the key issues, the devil in the detail issues, and get into discussion. But I hope that a short time looking back will actually show how much progress has been made in Europe in the last decade, or perhaps a bit more, 15 years, and that challenges can be tackled and can be overcome. So next slide, please. I'll begin with a few words about how things were in the early days, then touch on how regulation itself has evolved. Then a few words about the issues we've tackled along the way, and then, as Peter has said, a brief and high-level word about the challenges that we're tackling in the coming months and years. Next slide, please. Pharmacovigilance in Europe has traditionally always been a member state function, and this look at a few of the logos, bright and colourful logos of all the agencies, seems to illustrate and bring home the sheer diversity of all these individual organisations and the different populations they serve. Consequently, different approaches. Next slide, please. And so back in '95, the EMEA as it then was, established a working party as a forum for dialogue, simply to bring people together to exchange information. And it covered three main areas, and you can see that top of the list was organisational things, then product issues, I think at CPMP request in those days, handing it then on to CHMP, and then other inquiries at the request of authorities. What was special here, though, as you can see, was a dual mandate, not only reporting to CHMP, but to the heads of the agencies. And that's what made it rather special. But then, as we all know here, and I apologise for covering familiar ground to many colleagues here, there were a number of high-profile issues. Next slide, please, that really drew public attention to drug safety in Europe as never before. And as you can see at the bottom of those news cuttings, Europe was urged to keep an eagle eye on drugs already in the marketplace. And so in 2002, next slide, please, and a bit later, there was an initiative from the heads of agencies and the agency to introduce a European risk management strategy. Initially very much ad hoc, but by 2005, as you can see here, after heads of agencies and EMA, as it then was, had got together, this was made a formal and permanent working group. And as many of you will know, it has been meeting regularly to this day as probably the flagship initiative that has brought everyone together in the endeavour that we're here to see work as we go forward with the new legislation. So, a permanent working group to move things forward. Next slide, but in parallel, the European Commission too had begun to think about this area, and it conducted its own review of pharmacovigilance with some stark findings. And I think pretty well every one of these stakeholder meetings has begun by saying, this is what we're here to sort. Some pretty stark findings about a lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities, the speed of decision making, the transparency or lack of it, proactive and proportionate, very big emphasis on proportionality in terms of monitoring, and indeed a lack of inclusiveness of everyone involved, not just industry and regulator, but all parties involved. And so indeed what we're talking about doing now is very much to address these issues. What I'd like to do now is take you down the other path, the journey that's been travelled since 2006 when this report was published, to move towards today. We haven't sat and waited for the statute book to be populated. We have been moving. So next slide, you can see that the first step in 2005 was to give the Pharmacovigilance Working Party a bit more to do than talk. And here's a very clear mission statement focused on effective identification, assessment and management of risk. So already a clear purpose. And in the next slide, you'll see how those responsibilities were articulated. Now you can read all this as well as I can, but you can see the very explicit nature of evaluating signals, assessing and managing risk, looking at regulatory options, there's always options, monitoring action and the outcomes of the action, setting standards, promoting communication, and importantly, international cooperation. So a very clear and distinct set of activities in the last 5 to 6 years. Let's quickly touch on how regulation itself has evolved. In the next slide, a rather schematic diagram, which is always quite nice to have. 3 particular phases. We all started out with, if you click through, Marika, this yes-no licensing and then wait-and-see pharmacovigilance. We moved in 2005 to proactive risk management and better evidence. And where are we now? We consider that benefit risk should be monitored and integrated throughout the life cycle. Easier to say than to do, but that's where we are now. What are the issues we have tackled along the way? In the next slide, I've listed a few. I know there are more, but these seem to me to be the top ticket ones. To get better science and better methodologies into pharmacovigilance, to fill the gaps in expertise, to involve the users of medicines, and in particular patients and the public, to be transparent about what we do, and to optimise use of resources. As I say, it's not an exclusive list, but these were the big issues, and indeed it's taken the European Risk Management Strategy Group a lot of energy to move in parallel across all these themes. How successful have we been, you're asking? Well, on methodologies and science, first and foremost, the managing of safety data in the EU has moved on in leaps and bounds since EudraVigilance was first put in place in 2001, now capable of detecting signals for a population of, well, over 500 million. That is an incredible step forward. Pilot projects 1, 2, 3 to develop member states' processes, still ongoing to optimise signal detection and signal management. But signals are only the beginning of a story. It was clear on the next slide from 2005 onwards that the regulatory tool of risk management would only ever succeed if evidence, information and resources were available to maximise this opportunity. So it's been a major success story, if we might say, that a European network is now in place, alive and kicking. This idea that we can have resources that are not only visible, but possibly even networked. So there are now, as you see at the bottom of the slide, 14 specialist networks. So when an issue is identified, you know where the interest and expertise is and where the data sources might be available. So that's a very big step forward. And in order to respond in terms of the Pharmacovigilance Working Party, where I sit, on the next slide, you can see how we've addressed filling the gaps. After a gap analysis, it was really heartening to see how right round the EU, in the countries listed here, co-opted experts came forward to be not so much part of decision making, but to enhance the understanding of the evidence in pharmacoepidemiology, biostatistics, risk management, risk communication, biotechnology, and in paediatrics. And they're not all there, but I just thought it was a chance to give you a sight of these good people. They have devoted a huge amount of time to helping us make better decisions. But there's one type of expertise, and it is expertise that isn't there. If you move to the next slide, and that is the actual expertise that matters, those that use medicines day to day. And I'd like briefly to make a tribute to our patient observers. They've been with us since 2008, and they've had a special input into signals, benefit risk, strategic issues, communications, and in fact, they've had a special contribution to every aspect of pharmacovigilance. And Albert van der Zijden, Gretchen Goossens, who had to step down, and now Christina Cabrita are very active. They contribute on pretty well every issue, and they have set a standard. And I know David Harry's here today and contributed to the pilot that put this in place. So again, I think we've come a very long way. So this leads to the next major issue, which is communications and transparency. With the growing focus on drug safety, it was quite clear that we would need to make much more information available and make it available in a timely way. In September 2009, we published the first of the monthly reports, and Priya Bari's here. She knows the long and arduous story of how to get the policy agreed, and a timely monthly publication. It was out yesterday, I think, or is it out today, this month? It's next week now. But every month you can now read about the activities, not those that are for the CHMP, but the activities for the Working Party. 30 issues so far. I wouldn't say you can set your clock by it, but almost that. And the number of issues that you can look forward to, the number of items in each issue, next slide, you can see in the paler blue columns here, has actually grown month on month. So it's a good flow of issues out there as they are real-time considered and discussed and decided. You can also see here with the darker bars, the DHPCs, the direct health professional communications, which again, a steady throughput, nothing particularly in the way of a pattern here, but a really steady throughput, the focus on getting the messages out. Since 2008, next slide, also to support implementation, the assessments in summary form have been published, and I hope everybody in this room is assisted by that clarity, that drill down detail on the evidence that's been looked at to support the recommendations. And I think, again, it's a pretty good initiative that has led to at least 320 odd substances being covered. You can see those, I think, via the CMDH usually, or HMA website. And it's quite interesting to reflect, if you look on the next slide, how the policy on access to documents and the initial rush for access in individual product-related issues seems to have been impacted by the publication of a monthly report. Now, I guess this is fairly blunt, a blunt tool to assess this, but you would almost, with the eye of faith, think that regular publication, openness, actually helps to mitigate these growing numbers of access to document freedom of information requests. So I've laboured this a little while, but I know that many colleagues are a bit concerned about the impact of much greater transparency, but I think we've paved the way, we've gained experience, and I think we're ready for it now. Next slide, please. The new activities have obviously required a very hard look at how we optimise resources. And some of you may know this gentleman. He pioneered, Pim van der Giesen from the Netherlands, work sharing. Much easier to say than to do. The devil is always in the detail. You might say, let's share our resources, but doing it, trusting one another, and coordinating it with industry, really quite complex. So this, again, has been a pioneering initiative. We're thinking hard about how we transition it to the new legal requirements, but I would say to you that without it, we wouldn't be in a position to lift the burdens in PSURs that we now are. And of course, next slide, it has required a lot of coordination. At the Pharmacovigilance Working Party level, we often feel that we're right in the middle of it all, but we've had to build strong relationships with CMDH in order to deliver these resource lifting initiatives. So I look forward again that in the future, this focus on good interactions will continue. So for the last few words, I'd like to just focus now on the challenges. How are we going to maximise the benefits of the new approaches while minimising burdens? That's really centre stage. How can we maintain operational efficiency and operate quality systems with the challenges of introducing a major raft of new measures? How can we continue to strengthen the science and the methodologies? And in the end, is it all going to make a real difference in terms of effective risk minimisation? Well, work is increasing. Next slide. There's a lot more in the system than there ever was. We're just looking back here to 2009 and one particular metric, which is how many reports the Working Party issues for centrally and nationally authorised products. And it doesn't need any statistics to tell you here that this is getting much bigger. And a big jump up in the reports to CHMP. It's a good sign because it means that for the future, pharmacovigilance, CHMP should be aligning, particularly around the much greater volume of work around centrally authorised products. Next slide, a particular type of work that's increasing is the outcome of inspections of marketing authorisation holders' pharmacovigilance systems. And the clear message that we want to streamline this with assessors working closely with inspectors to make sure that there are no beats missed in this. We need to keep very much on top of it. It's an important and a growing area. And the next challenging area, the delivery of good post-authorisation studies. I just flash up this paper by Blake et al., the local team, looking hard at how post-authorization studies have been delivered since particularly NCEP came on stream. Very encouraging to see the volume now very much higher than it initially was. About a third were done. Now it's up in the 80-85%, I think. But still a challenge in getting it moving, as you see in that boxed area. The lag time, the medium time to starting from a positive CHMP opinion to a study in place was well over a year. And when you think of how long it takes for these studies to be done, again, we don't want to miss a beat. And then on the next slide, wrapping things together, the biggest challenge of all is showing that all this effort, all this investment is demonstrably protecting the public health. It's what this is all about. Not easily done. We can pick specific cases to investigate the impact, but how would we be able to say, all of us, that what we do demonstrably improves outcomes? So in summary, next slide. I'd like to say that building on a wealth of experience, we've evolved into a coordinated network function, that the new legislation provides for clarity, proportionality, and stakeholder involvement. I've said the new legislation will support delivery of health outcomes based on better evidence, but we all have a tremendous opportunity now in Europe to maximise public health protection while making best use of resources. There's a common saying you may be familiar with, that those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Well, I think and I hope I've shown that we do remember where we've come from. We've all learnt, we've gained from the experience, we've evolved, and I think we're all ready to move forward.